Good day, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Leadership Synergized. I'm Kevin Smith, your host. Today, we have a special guest, a guest who works in an area that I'm going to admit right out of the gate I have zero expertise in. Mr. Dan Culleny is joining us from Branson, Missouri. Dan is in the acting business, and we're going to talk about his career, his background, what makes someone want to be an actor in this 21st century. Dan's going to share learnings that he's had throughout his life and offer some advice. And I hope you sit back and enjoy him as much as I have. Dan, thank you so much, my friend. I know you're taking time away from your family during your downtime vacation season, but I appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Dan, jumping in, talk a bit about this acting gig and what led you to be an actor.
Yeah, glad to. Let's see. My background, I've got some performing in the family. Got a grandmother who was in the Rockette touring group, and that was back in the, I guess it would have been back in the 50s. So I've got it in the blood. And she opened a dance studio back in New Jersey. That's originally where I'm from. We had it in the family, and I was, believe it or not, a pretty shy kid. You'll find that a lot of people in the acting profession are on the shyer side. And so I was pushed into the acting world when I was 13 years old. Wasn't sure about it, but first time I jumped in to a character and became somebody other than myself up on stage, I just fell in love with it. I've been doing that ever since I was about 13 years old and doing it professionally since I was 19.
I've heard a story from someone whose name I'm not allowed to pass along that you moved into acting begrudgingly at that age of 12 or 13 years old. And as you were pushed in that direction, your response would be, okay, but I'm not going to do this part or that part and this part being dancing or singing. But as you kept getting pushed, eventually you experienced the whole ball.
That's right. That is absolutely right. Just jumping into something new, not sure where my skill sets were at that time, just trying new things and being a shy kid. I definitely got a slow start on it and then realized after jumping into every new skill set, realizing how much I loved it, eventually I just jumped right in.
And it's been a part of you for almost 20 years then.
Oh my goodness, yeah. Since I was 13, yeah, almost 20 years.
Dan, let's back up. I got ahead of ourselves a bit. Tell us a bit about Dan Culleny, the man, the husband, the father, the brother, the son.
I love it. Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, I'm from New Jersey initially, and I found myself moving to Missouri in my career path. Actors, especially in the theater world, find themselves moving quite a bit, but I was able to find a little bit of stability and security out here in Missouri and ended up meeting my wife out here. Now, when I moved out, I was 19 and I met her when I was 20, and we got married when I was 21, and we've been married for coming up on 10 years now. So we've got 2 daughters out here. I still live out here in Branson. And interesting enough, my entire family, immediate family anyway, has since moved to this area from up there, which I don't think happens pretty often. So we're very blessed to have had that happen. My sister, who you know, Amy, she's out here, as well as my sisters, Caitlin and Aaron, my parents. My grandmother, who I mentioned earlier, is out here, and I even have an uncle out here. So it's really wild how that worked out. So now I'm located out here in Branson, Missouri.
You have a beautiful family, having a chance to have met them last fall, the fall of 2023, and had a chance to take in one of your shows, which was just spectacular. We'll talk more about that as we go through this week's episode. And I should have mentioned as well, Dan's with us not for one, but for 2 episodes this week, and then again in next week's Leadership Synergized episode. And Dan, you mentioned something a moment ago when I first asked you about acting, and you talked about most actors tend to be on the shy side. I find that a bit surprising.
Yeah, a lot different than being a public speaker, somebody that would go on stage and say, this is me speaking as, well, say Dan Culleny to a big audience. A lot of times with actors going into film roles or theater roles, they are becoming a different person and they're getting their energy from that. And so for me, when I was 13, escaping into that and becoming a different character, it was a way to cope with that shyness a little bit and really to resonate with an audience through the eyes of a character instead of myself.
Interesting. I just never correlated shyness with that of an actor. It would seem for a layman like myself, as I stated, that you would have to be very bold with what you do and in your performance. So the performance that my wife and I were blessed to see in September again of 2023, every actor just jumps off the stage at us. We'll talk more specifically there, but I'm going to ask a question that probably seems a little bit maybe, okay, he knows that. For me and for those watching, what is an actor? How do you define being an actor when someone asks you about your career?
If I can put it as simply as possible, an actor is a storyteller, somebody who enjoys telling a story to somebody. When I'm in conversation with a smaller group, one of my favorite pastimes, one of my favorite things to do is just tell a story of something happened when I was a kid or something that happened with somebody sitting next to me and seeing the reaction from that. Actors just do that on a really big scale through the eyes of characters. So just like if somebody gets lost in a book or lost watching a film, actors are there to just help transport that person into whatever world that is being portrayed. It's a lot of fun to do that. And then sometimes you get the blessing and opportunity to transport somebody into a world where they're morals out of the story, or they are having a perspective shift in their mind, or really just life-changing experience from the story. That is the best moment for an actor, is when they can tell a story to somebody and it be just completely life-changing for them.
Then, as you reflect on what almost is 20 years in the profession, starting at the young age, I think you said of 13, and where you are now, what's some of the takeaways or learning as you reflect back on the Dan as you were first beginning to serve as an actor to where you are today?
Wow, what a question. Let me think on that for a bit. When I was younger, like I said, it was a way of coming out of my shell and just being able to relate to other people in a very unique way. As you get older, some of that shyness goes away. You just learn to interact with people. You just grow up and socialize. And so for me, what used to be just a way to fit in with the people around me and fit in with society, and it has now become a way of really trying to serve the people around me and serve the audience. And it's really what it is. It's servanthood. It's saying, this is the product we're giving you. I hope you enjoy it. I hope that you're blessed by it. I hope that you're having fun. And so that's the way I try to view it now, not so much internal, but pushing it outward.
Thank you for that. It makes a lot of sense listening to you describe that piece. I know, being a layman to the industry and knowing very little about the backdrop, other than when you turn on the television set, you watch a series, an episode, or a movie, or when we were in the theater there in Branson watching you and your castmates perform, just the awesomeness of the performance itself. But there's a lot of work behind the scenes that goes on for an actor, I would assume, to develop the necessary skills. And I would assume that work is somewhat different depending on the role that actor is playing. Correct?
That is right. There's a lot of work that goes in, from some of the more practical work of just learning lines. Sometimes, especially when you're doing a large scale theater production with two acts and a whole lot of scenes in there, it can be daunting, just that step alone. And there's a few different methods that go into doing that. Some people do what's called speed reading, which is just reading through the lines as quick as possible just to get it ingrained there. There's a lot of different methods, but that's just step one. After that, you have to explore the historical context that the character's in. You have to read up on kind of their childhood and how they grew up and how they interacted with people. So there's a lot of character work that's done as well.
And I assume there's some physical workout type of items that come into play. Again, probably subject to the role that one might be playing.
That is correct, yes. And a lot of film actors and Hollywood actors will find trainers to get them in that specific shape that they're looking for, especially when you think about maybe a superhero movie or whatnot. A lot of what I find myself doing here in Branson, at the theater I work at, there are a lot of those soldier types, bodyguard types, and whatnot. So it's a really good idea to stay in good physical condition for that reason. But also, theater is a very physical job and it's very athletic. We will, over the course of one show, we'll travel up to sometimes 2 or 3 miles just around the stage. We've got a lot of
Wow.
flights of stairs. And so we burn a whole lot of calories in one day, that's for sure.
Wow, what a workout in that aspect. Building on our discussion point here just a little bit, my friend, typically when you're preparing to launch a role, how long does it take you from the point of learning you have the role to the point of your first, what's the word I'm looking for? Your first presentation, the first public viewing, in
Sure.
essence. Performance
Yeah.
is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah, when we premiere the show, typically we receive our scripts maybe 3 or 4 months prior to the premiere of a show. And so in my case, we'll receive scripts maybe in October, November, sometimes as late as December, final edits of scripts. So we have that time frame to learn, usually have a few months to learn the script. And then we have anywhere from a month to 6 weeks to actually put it up on its feet, speak the lines, try it out across from our fellow actors, put it on the set pieces, about 6 weeks to get it up on its feet.
I assume that's a double digit hour a day in that 6 week period for the most part in getting ready.
Sometimes it is. We never know what to expect. We've learned to keep our schedules wide open during that rehearsal process because sometimes it can go really smooth and we've got a couple of days off here or there. And sometimes we run into some snags, some things we got to work out, and it can be some longer days for sure.
Then from the point of preparing, receiving that script for the first time, preparing during that 6 weeks for the premiere on stage, looking at the theater work, typically you have a part, I would assume, that lasts weeks or months at a time. So there's multiple performances during that window of time. Does the script change during that piece? Are there adjustments made, or is it typically pretty much the same from the first time you saw it?
The script remains the same for pretty much the entire season. We rehearse every year. For example, the show I'm doing now, we did for a year. We're going back to a rehearsal season to freshen some things up. That's when the director will come in and they'll have discretion. Hey, let's change some things here or there. Let's change some lines. Let's change some of the blocking or movement on stage a little bit. But once we've locked something in after rehearsals, we keep it locked in for the whole year. And we'll do out here at our location in Branson close to 400 shows in the year.
What makes a director? What feedback do they take, or what information or data point might they use to do some tweaking as you described?
That's a great question. Sometimes it's truly just having seen the show up on its feet after premiere and having a new inspiration or a new idea and thinking, oh, that could have worked a little bit different, and then having to wait all year to implement it. But yes, the remounting of the show every year comes with little tweaks here or there. And we actually love to see that because that means us as the actors who've just done it for 300 or 400 times, we get to add something new, which is great. There's not typically too much new in the way of material or lines. There are some word changes to make it make a little bit more sense. But typically what we see is some blocking or movement changes to make the pictures look maybe just a little bit cleaner.
There's probably a little bit, from an actor's point of view, an opportunity to be challenged a bit, a little more growth type aspect, or something just with a little more nuance.
That's right. A lot of times the director will come in for year two, and sometimes we'll have a brand new director put their hands on it as well. And that is a challenge for us. A lot of times they're asking, let's just push this further. Let's just get more energy out of some of these scenes. Let's get more emotion out of some of these scenes. And that's a challenge for us because when you've lived in something for 10 months or so, you get a little muscle memory, and all of a sudden, what's this new stuff that's happening? I'm not used to this. And sometimes it's a challenge to break out of that muscle memory and do something new. But that's also part of the excitement of it as well.
Great point. I hadn't thought about, Dan. Putting on 400 shows in a year, same show. I would assume that it's challenging at times to keep that edge. Talk a little bit about that. How does Dan keep that edge to where every show seems new or seems like the first time and that excitement's there?
Oh, goodness. That's a great question. It comes down to listening, being really good at listening on stage, because what's so neat about live theater is you're working across from other live actors who also make changes every day, small, subtle changes. We also have understudies and backups that will rotate in. So truly every show is a little bit different. And if you're good as an actor of not fully going autopilot and letting your mind wander to something else and truly listening, then you can have a slightly, even if it's slight, it's a different response than maybe the show prior. And that in itself is exciting.
The show that I saw, you all were fantastic. The edge, the newness, it was so fresh. But Dan, backing up a bit and thinking just about your career as a whole, what are some roles you've played that really jump out that you felt had an impact on molding you as an actor?
Thank you for that question. I'm excited to answer that one. At Sight and Sound, which is the theater that I work here in Branson, Missouri, I've played a lot of different roles throughout the years. A lot of times they are villainous types of roles, or maybe
Oh,
angrier, or sometimes the crazy type. And those are actually pretty exciting and fun to play. And I would say for a role like that, this might sound a little unexpected, but it's pretty easy to separate and just say, I'm going to jump into this crazy caricature of a role and separate that from normal life. Oftentimes, when it comes to the more regular, relatable roles, real characters that are going through a challenge, that's when it can affect life a little bit more because you can relate to that and go, I'm going through that right now. And so for me personally, I prefer the villainous types for that reason that I really can detach from it. But the ones that bring the most growth, I would say, are those more real, those relatable roles.
so in those relatable roles, and great point. Thank you for going there. Something for me to learn from. And this is what I love about the discussions we have with our guests. There's so much reality there that many of us can just touch. And I'm learning from Dan here that really relates in my life with the roles that I have. But those roles that you talked about that are relatable, basically what I think I hear you saying, Dan, is they touch who you are in the real life world, correct? Where the villainous part, that's not Dan at all. Dan's not a villain, so he can go play that and just have fun with it and just have the joy come out naturally.
That's right. That's right. To give you an example, and you talked about certain roles that have challenged me or affected me. We just came off of doing our show, Jesus, that we did the past few years. I had the absolute honor of playing that role the second year that it was playing. But let me tell you, it was the most challenging experience I've ever had in my career. And like I said, with many roles, you can detach and become that role, and your life is completely separate. But you can imagine with a role like that, I don't want my life to be completely separate from that. I want that role to inform my life as much as possible. Now, talk about an unattainable goal, right? I could never get to that status of the Christ, but I felt like if I was not putting in at least a solid effort to live out what I was preaching on stage in that role, that I was faking it up there. With that, it was living that life on stage and trying to live it so much off stage. There's a lot of pressure there. And so it was the most rewarding role that I've played and such an honor. But I got to tell you, it was a pretty big challenge too.
I assume you're saying that pressure is more internal based when you come step off stage and come back
Yes,
into the daily world that you represent.
that's right. Absolutely.
Have there ever been moments in those roles that you played that are really relatable to Dan that you've maybe had to catch yourself the next day, not on stage, maybe on a day off and say, no, wait a minute, I'm not this character right now. I'm Dan, the husband, the father, the brother.
That's a great question. To be honest with you, I've definitely learned lessons from roles, and there are other roles that I got to play, for example, in our Jesus show that we did last year, where how the character reacted to something definitely spoke to me as Dan. And I said, whoa, I definitely do that in my life. And so there were good lessons learned. And I felt like there were good things that I could apply from that. Just like reading scripture, reading about a character and thinking, wow, that's me. Let me see how I can change this part of my life just like this character did. So I've had that. But to be honest, it's been pretty easy to detach and to unplug from the theater world when I leave that building and say, okay, I'm just living my life as Dan now.
Good for you. That speaks volumes of the person you are. And I love hearing that aspect because the time or two that you and I have spoke, just a brief meeting that we had several months ago, I sense that you take the challenge to grow to be more like Jesus in real life very seriously as you serve your duty to our Father in that aspect. I congratulate you for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
You've talked about some lessons learned a bit in these character pieces. Reflecting back, are you willing to share something from a role that as you left, you're thinking, wow, I could have done something better or differently, or that was just embarrassing?
There are so many things that happen in live theater. I could go down so many roads with this, but I definitely have a few that come to mind. And working in live theater, we work with children, we work with big sets, we work with animals. So there's always crazy things that happen. And truly, you asked me before, how do you keep it fresh in theater and doing the same thing over and over? Another way to keep it fresh is honestly when things do go a little bit wrong, it's nice to take that opportunity and say, okay, something's happening. How do we fix this? So hopefully the audience can't tell, or the audience sees it and goes, that was a good way to save that situation. And I revel in those moments. I embrace them. But there are many times that I leave and come back and think, oh, if I had just said this in response to that little mistake or mishap, that would have been just perfect. So those moments, I live for those moments, to be honest with you. But there are things that happen, especially with the animals. I get to ride a horse in this show, and you never know what to expect with the horses. My horses are pretty good. I've got maybe about 98% of my shows, they're spot on doing what they need to do. But there's sometimes that maybe they'll get spooked by something and they will not do what I want them. And so I'm thinking back to last year when I was riding one down the aisle and he just decided to pause in the aisle. And I thought he was maybe relieving himself in the aisle, if you will, but he wasn't. He was just scared of something. So I'm just sitting there in the aisle, looking around at everybody, waiting. And then he finally decided to move again. So those things happen. And honestly, that's where you just have to say, sometimes animals, and then move on and forget about it.
Sometimes animals don't follow script, right?
Yeah, that's right.
I love that. Dan, as we prepare to put a wrap on this episode, and again, thank you so much for agreeing to stick around for next week's show.
Sure.
Tell us a bit about, from your point of view, the profession of acting and what's changed in the period of time you've been in it, almost 2 decades now, that changed for the better. What are some things that you've got hope for will continue to change in the area of acting?
Great question. I've got a few thoughts on that. And to be honest with you, I've been in a little bit of a silo when it comes to this subject, having worked at one place consistently for a lot of my career. And I'm blessed to say that is the case. A lot of times for theater actors, that's not the case. Theater will have you traveling and auditioning a lot. And it's not so often that you see married couples, let alone folks that have children in this industry, because it is a lot. It's a lot of unknowns and auditions and moving and whatnot. There's that part of it. That's a big challenge in this profession, no matter what, I would say. There are a few exceptions, which is pretty neat when you find them. This profession, wow. So I am happy to say that with the prevalence of social media nowadays and people being able to self-promote, whether it's self-promote themselves or just smaller companies and studios being able to promote, you're seeing a lot more growth of smaller studios that have really quality work. When it comes to, I'm specifically speaking to films right now, I'm seeing a lot of that. And that's exciting because there are a lot of really good quality, wholesome studios out there that are putting good work out. And I just love seeing the response to it at the box office and theaters. With that said, the challenge nowadays is the box office and theaters and whatnot, because you have so many people opting to use those streaming services, which are great for smaller companies to say, hey, let's get our content out there. There might be even a company that will create an app that people can download and then they can watch their material. But it makes it challenging for it to be profitable when you put out a new piece of work. So there's a benefit for people who are aspiring to do that, but then there's the downside of not so many people go to cinema anymore, and that's sad. I miss those days.
But valid point, something I had not considered. And Dan, let's just talk a little bit as we segue from this episode for next week, a little insight. We're going to talk more about your role you're currently playing. But my wife, we're so blessed to see it was life changing for both of us in that piece. But it was the show is Queen Esther at the Sight and Sound Theater in Branson, Missouri. And you all are getting ready to, after your winter break, to launch another season of that show. Talk a little bit about your schedule, when the show comes back, and then we'll pick up with more detail next week.
That's right. If anybody plans on coming to Branson, Missouri anytime next year, we are playing Esther out here in Branson. We'll be playing Esther from the beginning of March. Forgive me, I don't know the exact day, but it's one of the first weeks of March all the way to the beginning of October. After that, we will be premiering a Christmas show that we have called The Miracle of Christmas that starts the beginning of November and goes to the end of the year.
The experience is powerful. I plan on coming back in 2024 to catch another episode. My wife, Deb, and I, Queen Esther. We're going to talk more about the show itself and Dan's role and what he's taken away from that piece next week. Dan, my friend, thank you so much for this time. Great discussion. God bless you for what you represent and representing our Lord. What a great actor you are, my friend, and I look forward to next week's discussion.
Thank you. Thank you for your words. Look forward to it.
Thank you again, Dan, and mark your schedule. Same time next week, same day next week. Dan's going to be with us. We're going to talk more about Dan, Queen Esther, and Dan's personal development planning, in particular around his strengths and his weaknesses. I'm Kevin Smith, thanking you for joining us on this episode of Leadership Synergized. You are appreciated, and we love you. God bless you.